Greetings. We're going to take a look at the Jupiter XM ZEN-Core Editor layout for Midi Designer Pro 2. Now the objective of this layout is the Jupiter XM is an amazingly powerful synthesizer. As a matter of fact, I learn something every time I sit down with it. There's just a lot of capability crammed into this machine. But one of the biggest challenges is it only talks to you for the most part in this very small screen here. And even though they've added some additional summary screens in 1.20, it's just hard to really see what's going on with your tone when you can only see maybe 4 parameters at a time. So the concept is try to bring as much of that information out to the larger screen of the iPad as we can. So let's just get started. My approach here is to go in and examine, not try to design some tones from scratch, but go in and just take a look at a couple example factory tones, just to show how they have been, what the designers have done there and what the different features of the ZEN-Core are doing in the different tones. So I've got scene 16, 16, a clean scene set up, and let's just make sure the one thing that keeps sneaking back in is some distortion or some mod FX. And another thing we need to do for setup, if you haven't done this yet, is we're going to go into System here and go down to MIDI transmit. We want to make sure that in the MIDI transmit, the transmit edit function is on, and we write that to system memory. What that does is when you turn in these knobs, for the most part, that enables the board to send the sysx message out, so something like Midi Designer Pro 2 that can listen can keep the knobs synchronized in the layout. I do want to apologize a little bit also for the production quality, trying to find how to get a camera to hang exactly in the right spot to see these two somewhat temperamental displays, lighting-wise that is, with high dynamic range as we change through it. And I do need to get probably a little better microphone here. Okay, so let's just get on with it here. Let's go and the first thing we want to do is we're going to hook up via Bluetooth, connect, and we could connect via hardwire as well. There's several options there. And then make sure we have that turned on as both a Bluetooth source and destination. We'll see on the left-hand side there's an index page that has direct access to most of the pages throughout the editor. And some overview pages. If a page has an orange underline under it, that's really a 2-page setup designed to be one on the left but one on the right. Well, sometimes we'll see that we'll be jumping around between them. I do have a couple pages of help here, and one of the things I'm trying to do is also collect as much information, put notes by buttons, group logical buttons, but even that doesn't capture everything. So I have brought in some of the information from the parameter guide, some of the diameter diagrams here, and also back with the LFO bank, the LFO cheat sheet that Roland has written. It's a very, very good way to explain their 4 delay modes that are in the LFO. So let's just get on with it at this point. I guess that one other caveat, my release 1.0 is out right now. This is the next update where I've already started to bring some of the functions together in a more functional layout, which should be out in the next couple days as soon as I finish editing and getting this video up. One more thought, I guess, is that the editor only works in part 1. If you need to edit a tone in another part, you need to bring it to part 1. You need to save it as a user tone anyway if you're spending effort making a tone. Bring it to part 1, edit in part tone, save it back as a user tone, then you can recall it in any of the 4 parts that you want to use it. Okay, so to get started, we're going to just bring up a somewhat simple tone here. This page I brought over from the Jupiter Manager layout. It's just one of the quick ways to get through different tones. So we're going to choose the RD piano, an expressive grand here. Let's get back out of this. So it sounds like we've got our piano loaded and ready to go. And let's go back over here to functions. So we've got our oscillator keys showing. We're editing oscillator 1, and this has 4 active oscillators in it. And just a quick look down here. This screen shows us, it's small but useful. We have the LFO on the left-hand side and the amp envelope on the right-hand side, and we can shift which, well, in other modes we can shift and see the pitch, filter, amplifier, amp in LFO, and the same with the envelope. But that doesn't work in the RD piano, even though you can go in and edit those items. So I don't know if that's a bug or not. I may have to see about reporting this. So let's get started on our tour through this. First thing we're going to do is take a look at the structure overview, and we hit load. That brings the information in. And I should point out, while we're loading, it takes about 2 seconds on most pages. You'll see the 2 red communication lights up here. When they go off, it's loaded. So this is structure. It starts at the top. It shows 4 oscillators on. They're all for PCM. The rest of this page is really focused on the ring, cross mod 2, where you're making structure relationships between the oscillators. We're going to go on just to keep working on to our next page here, which is an oscillator overview. Oscillators 1 and 2, 3, 4. Hit load. We're done. We see the same information, but now we get to see what our PCM waveforms are. So we're using stereo. We have a left and right, and these are all versions of a E5 a grand piano samples from forte, mezzo piano, mezzo forte. So we're saying for some reason they've layered 4 oscillators here. Continue digging to see what's going on. Now this is zone, which is sort of like zone key range and velocity settings. We'll hit load. Another comment on the 2-page layouts, the load buttons are the same. You saw they both went there. Excuse me. We see, okay, interesting, zone 1, the first thing we see difference here is zone 1, or oscillator 1, is going from G6 to G9, and a velocity of 57 to about 87 if my old bifocals are in focus. And then oscillator 3 is going the lower range companion to that, the same velocities. So they're splitting the keyboard with 2 different samples for that mid-velocity range. And then this one is covering the full key range for the lowest velocity, although it only goes to 2. It doesn't go all the way to 0. So you actually can, if you sneak the keyboard down without actually making any sound, you can bring it down to 0 and still actually get some sound. And then your highest velocity range samples here. Now if we go back and look at the oscillators, so let's see, zone 1 and 2, oscillator 1 and 2, then we'll see that mid-range had a forte sample. The mid-velocity range, upper keyboard had a forte sample. The low velocity range has a mezzo piano sample. Now comparing the other, did that wrong. Let's see, I want oscillator 3 and 4, zone 3 and 4. Okay, so then we have a mezzo forte sample on the lower range of the mid velocity, and then a forte sample on the high velocity. So they've sort of layered 4 samples across the velocity ranges to give that rich piano sound as you go through that. Just take a couple more quick things on this one. We take a look at the tone common page. This is settings in common to all 4 oscillators, such as tuning, overall tuning, portamento, bend, unison. We can turn unison on for the grand piano and make it. We can get to a real honky tonk sound here if we play with some of these settings down here. Then we have synth partial. Now we start to get into oscillator specific settings here. This page is really focused on a synthesizer doing some sort of VA or PCM noise, something like that type sample. So it doesn't have much to do here for us with the piano. Then we have final one is tone partial. And this is probably, if you're digging into here, if you're used to using the edit menu, this is the biggest, longest set of settings. And this has the most potential, as I said, in the upgrade to get them sort of sorted out by function. I've tried to do it here a little bit. And actually, I'll show you one prototype page coming up that will start to bring some of those together. One thing interesting for a piano on this page is, and let's load it, oscillator 1, we've got to select on this page and hit load. And for the piano, there's a half damper function that is obviously enabled here, and then there's a damper free zone and a damper free decay offset. So some settings unique to a piano type on this. And that's the thing, there are so many settings in the ZEN-Core and just knowing where to go. Final thing, we do have an amp envelope set here, and it's sort of like you'd expect to see. If we could go to amp envelope and load that. Now actually for the first time I'm actually going to go into the edit here. Let's go into edit here and get over to, so we're in partial 1, we want to be partial 1 here. Let's go to the amp envelope. Okay, and now we see we actually can use some of these knobs here. So let's see, that's amplified, and you see that the knob here is following. We see it adjust. So that they're not, you sort of learn what they are. So this is just amp, but this is actually impacting your time 1. D that's time 3. That's level 3 setting, and then that's time 4 setting. The depth, I think, the depth is not doing anything for us on that. But you see, when we talk about the transmit edit, when even if we dig in here or start making a change here using this, it will follow, the MIDI Designer Pro 2 will follow along with us. So the load really, the load brings in the initial settings, the bulk settings, and then as you adjust things after that, they will pretty much stay in sync. But you still want to load when you come back to a page. You need to load when you change oscillator to get the initial information brought into it. Well, we spent enough time on the piano. Let's look at something. Let's go take a look at something that's doing something different. Go back to tones here. I'm going to go to XV 5080. Let's do something that maybe not that you don't think is that interesting, but let's look at this. We're going to look at the pipe organ. Cathedral pipe organ. So we'll start again. I'm sorry, I went to the wrong place. Start by going to the structure overview. And let's load that and see what's, whoops, I hit index instead of load. Structure overview, load. And we really don't see anything happen there, but we got the same thing. There was no changes. So we have 4 oscillators, all 4 still running PCM. So let's go to the next page and see what's going on. The oscillator overview, hit load. Okay, now we see we're using mono samples. We only have 1 on each side, 1 on the left side. There's nothing on the right side, which means it's mono. And it's the same sample, C110, all the way across the same PCM waveform. So that's interesting. They've loaded the same sample. They're using up 4 sets of oscillators with the same sample. What are they doing? We go to zone settings, load that again. Well, they have a velocity layer, but of course I'm not sure you would expect a velocity. I'm not sure you would expect a velocity layer with an organ. As a matter of fact, the amp envelope looks exactly like what we'd expect to see here, a straight square. But we're starting to see something interesting here. There's something going on in the LFO. That's the pitch LFO view. Now we're back where we can actually change these. Now we see the filter LFO is flat. Amp LFO, there's just a little bit of form there. It may be hard to see, but we see those. Now the same over here. We can go through the amp, go to the envelopes. Pitch envelope looks dead flat. The filter envelope looks dead flat, and the amp envelope's square. So they're not doing anything here with we're not doing anything with the envelopes for this sound. So, but something has happened in the LFO. So let's go take a look at that and see what's going on there. Index LFO1. Let's load that. And so what we're seeing here is that we're using I'm oscillator 2. Let's go back to oscillator 1. They're using the LFO LFO1 just to modulate pitch depth a little bit and modulate the amplifier depth just a little bit. And if we step through the 4 oscillators, we'll see then there's slightly different settings on that for each one of these. So they're using they've got 4 identical samples being played, but with 4 LFOs playing against them in sort of a random format. You see they're just using a random form here. And if we look at LFO2, it's showing not available there, but we should be able to see LFO2. Let's just go look at it this way. LFO2 is probably not doing anything. I don't think it was doing anything. So, yeah, no, the settings are all 0 on LFO. The amplitude settings are all 0 on that. Well, here's, I guess, one thing good to mention. One thing I've done in this design, a lot of controls, like the rate will go from 0 to 1023. There's one setting that goes 0 to 10,8000. I've downsampled those, so like this jumps every 4. So you get the full range, but you may not get the exact value. If you really need 973, you may have to come over here, get to 970 using that control and dial it in precisely here. So one other thing, that the other way they're getting a little bit of sound density here is if we go to the tone partial. Let's go to oscillator 1, load that. They've offset the tuning and a little bit, I think some of the pan, maybe a little bit of the pan each of those. So we have four, looking at this, we got the 4 exact same samples. We got LFO1 wobbling the pitch a little bit, and then we have the tone partial is adjusting the coarse tune of each to give us that nice full organ sound. If we go back over here, let's go to oscillator, and you can see turn it off. We have just the one sound. So it's maybe a more realistic way than just using, for example, a unison function, which we could do. Unison is on for this. Nope. But that's not quite as much fidelity. Okay, well that's enough with that one. Let's go on and see something else going on. So now we want to go to PRA, and we're going to go take a look. This is category 41 here. Phrase. We want to go to Datacran. Okay, so we got Datacran. Now this is an interesting sound. It's got a lot of motion. It's only got one oscillator on. We have all the, and let's just make sure this comes in with its own delay. So we got the delay off, so we have the dry sound. Let's see what's going on with that. So let's go to Structure Overview, Load. So first thing we see is now we have oscillator 1 is the only one on, but now we have VA and has the cross mod selected. So they're using the cross modulation to generate some of the tone here. So turn it on, we can adjust the cross mod here. If we bring the mod depth down, it should be, because we play with these here. And this is not a lesson how to just show you what you can do with these. So let's see what else is going on. We see something interesting here in the pitch LFO view. Nothing in the filter, nothing in the amp. So let's go see what's going on in the pitch LFO. So let's go to LFO1, let's load that. While we're doing that, let's get LFO2 up at the same time. And let's load, well, I need to be on oscillator 1. That's not doing me any good here, let's see. Because I've only got a single oscillator here. So I see that they're using step mode here, which means you can define up to 12 steps. But we don't see 12 steps of data here. So the first thing I'm going to do is sort of cheat a little bit. I'm going to drive the rate up, and that will bring the rest of my, actually I get multiple views of the overall sample view. So if we go to the steps and load those, we will see that that's sort of what's been defined. And we could, if we can, you know, if you edit those steps, you'll see that in real time here coming on in the picture. Now what's happening here is, even though I've changed the rate, I haven't changed the tone, because actually I'm on sync here, which means it's using tempo sync to 1/16 of a note. So if I want to change the speed of the sound, I can adjust it with the tempo here. So I don't know if that's a bug or feature, but that allows me to pull in the whole LFO waveform there and see what's going on. I said now we can, and I don't know if this is another bug here. Even though LFO2 is there, it doesn't let me push this LFO2 button and see it. When I actually go in, let's go in and edit. Let's go in all the way over to the edit page again. So let's go to LFO, filter envelope. It's further down, LFO1, LFO2. So now that I'm actually in the edit page, it will let me turn the LFO2 button on. So I'm going to may have to see if that's in, as you see, if I change this, let's go see the LFO2, we will see LFO, the respective value here changing. What am I changing? I'm changing waveform, so there's my waveform changing as I adjust that. So LFO2 here, LFO1 was messing with pitch depth and pan depth. LFO2 was changing the filter depth, the amp depth, and the pan depth as well. And LFO1 was using the 12 steps. LFO2 was using a sample and hold. So in other words, now let's just show what's happened. Let's take out LFO1, take out these values, so we just have LFO2 going. If we take out the, now we can just change LFO2 and see what happens if we change the waveform. And then the same way, if we turn off the filter depth, come on, you silly thing. If you triple tap something, it goes back to its default value. So now by taking that off, the only thing we have left of the tone now is the cross mod. And if we dial that off, we just have here the pure bass wave. Okay, one or two quick final samples. Let's go choose Super Wave, PRD or Super Saws, and that's going to be up in synth. There's only in the common thing, there's only a bazillion of these different synths here. Let's see, Super Saws. I went past him. Super Saws. Here we are. Let's exit out of that so we can see. Oh, no Gildorf experiences. Okay, so let's see what's going on. So we've seen there, the LFO, there's nothing happening in the LFO. Pitch, filter, amplitude. We have a square amplitude envelope. But we actually do have a filter. Well, we don't have much of a filter. That's just sort of square here. So what's causing this sound? This is actually a fairly simple sound. This is load our structure overview. And they're using the super saw in the first two oscillators and PCM in the third. So if we go look at those oscillators, oscillator overview load. Okay, super saw, then PCM, and they're putting a do in that third oscillator. So you just hear that little do that's coming in behind, maybe a little bit of a attack transient. So I think the only thing we want to see here is the synth partial. So this is one. Super saws is not a very exciting thing, but they do set it here, and then you do have your detune here, pulse width, depth. You can so there are a couple settings for super saw, but otherwise it's a fairly simple setup. Okay, final one to take a look at here. Tones, we're going to go to XV5080. This is category 38. MG sweep. Okay, so this is the one, we finally have something interesting going on in the filter envelope. It reminds me of something I forgot to mention over here on the left. We have different, you see different things going on this LFO. You also can see two vertical lines, and let's just jump though, even though we don't have anything happening in the LFO, just to show you what they are. We're on oscillator 1, and one, the horizontal line is your offset. So in other words, you see it's the offset value. The delay time is the first of the vertical lines, and then the fade time is the second of those vertical lines. I should have mentioned that we're looking at it. And once again, the LFO cheat sheet that is in the parameter manual explains how to use some of that if you're not familiar with it. So let's go on and just take a quick look at the filter envelope. Go to filter envelope and load. Okay. So there we have a good, true, traditional sweeping filter envelope, and we see what the settings are here for our depth and things like that. And this is actually the first of the new page that I've started trying to bring all the filter parameters together out of the higgledy-piggledy mess of that other page. And you'll see we have our cutoff, our resonance. And, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, 73, 74, 75, 76, 77, 78, 79, 80, 81, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, 100, 101, 102, 103, 104, 105, 106, 107, 108, 109, 110, 111, 112, 113, 114, 115, 116, 117, 118, 119, 120, filter type up, VCF here, and so VCF we have a high pass filter. The type of the filter. A gain correction, and so other traditional filter settings here. The whole reason I got started on this was actually trying to be able to look up the PCM waveforms. There are about 2,200 PCM waveforms, and you just got a default sort with this dial down here. That's duplicated up here. But I've tried to group them and categorize them here. And so in other words, if you're looking for a Hammond PCM waveform or something like that. Now there's more work to do in the sorting. This sort's about 90% accurate. And so as I update it, and as well, the sort is duplicated on the Roland Clan Forums website. You can find the spreadsheet that has this sort in there. So at this point, we walked through pretty much a lot of what's in this. But as I said, every day I play with this, I learn more capability and find out more of what's going on within this board. And hopefully, by freeing it from trapped behind the small screen here, getting out to the little larger screen, give you a little more capability to particularly see relationships as you're trying to build your sounds. And the final thing is, once you got that killer sound, don't forget to then write it as a user tone.